Hey, podcasters. Have you ever been listening to a podcast and wished there was a way to, get right to the good stuff?
Yeah. Especially those super long episodes.
Right. Like you just don't always have time to listen to the whole thing.
I feel that.
So what do you do?
Well, you can try scrubbing through it.
Yeah, but that takes forever.
It really does. Like sometimes you just give up.
Totally. And then you miss out on potentially valuable info.
Exactly. And that's where timestamps come in.
Timestamps?
You know those little markers in the episode description?
Oh, yeah, I've seen those.
They tell you exactly what's covered and when.
Like chapter headings for your ears.
Exactly.
Okay, so I see how timestamps can save time, but isn't that kind of like cheating?
Cheating.
Well, the creator put all that effort into the whole episode, and we're just cherry picking.
I see your point. It's like, are we respecting the listener's time or disrespecting the creator's vision?
Yeah, that's the debate, right?
It is. And that's where our guest star for this deep dive comes in, Chris from the Podtastic Audio podcast.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that show.
It's like the go-to podcast for anyone who wants to make their podcast sound amazing.
I could use some of that.
Chris is all about giving indie podcasters the tools and tips to create top-notch shows.
So he knows his stuff.
For sure. And in this episode, he dives deep into the world of timestamps, why he loves them, how to use them, and why they might not be for everyone.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's hear what Chris has to say.
Well, get ready to have your mind blown because Chris makes a pretty compelling case for timestamps.
Really? Even for those of us who feel a little guilty about skipping around.
Yep. In fact, he argues that timestamps can actually boost listener engagement.
Wait, hold on. How does that work? If people are skipping around, how are they more engaged?
Think about it. If you can easily find the part of an episode that's most relevant to you, you're more likely to stick around, right?
I guess so.
You're not wasting time on stuff you don't care about, so you're getting more value out of your listening experience.
Okay. I'm starting to see his point. It's like I'm way more likely to finish a book if I can jump around to the chapters that grab my attention first.
Exactly. And that's not all that. Chris also points out that timestamps can help you reach a wider audience.
Okay, now that I don't get, how does letting people skip around attract more listeners?
It's all about giving people choices. Some folks might have time for the full episode, while others might only want to hear about a specific topic. Timestamps let you cater to both.
So I could be all about that guest interview, but you might only be interested in the news segment.
Right, and with timestamps, we can both find exactly what we're looking for without having to wade through the entire episode.
It's like having a custom playlist for your podcast. You get to pick your favorite tracks.
You got it. And Chris takes it even further. He talks about how timestamps can be a huge help for YouTube SEO.
YouTube SEO. Okay, now you're going to have to explain that one.
Yeah.
I'm not super techie.
Yeah. Sure. SEO stands for search engine optimization, and it's basically how easy it is for people to find your content on the internet. When you add timestamps to your YouTube videos, you're giving YouTube a roadmap of what your video is about.
So it's like creating chapters that make it easier for YouTube to understand my content.
Exactly.
Interesting. So it helps people find my podcast.
You got it. And that can translate to more views and more subscribers.
Wow, color me impressed. I'm starting to think Chris is a genius. But okay, let's play devil's advocate here. Are there any downsides to using timestamps?
Of course, not every creator is on board with timestamps, and for valid reasons. Some feel that it encourages listeners to skip around too much, potentially missing out on the nuances and connections that make an episode a cohesive whole.
I can see that. It's like skipping to the last page of a mystery novel. You might find out who did it, but you miss the whole thrill of the investigation.
Exactly. And some creators are really concerned about maintaining artistic integrity. They've carefully crafted an episode with a specific flow and structure, and they don't want that disrupted by listeners jumping around.
Right? It's their art. They have a vision, and they want people to experience it as intended. But isn't that kind of controlling? Like telling people how they have to listen?
That's where the debate gets really interesting. It's about finding a balance between respecting the creator's vision and respecting the listener's time.
Okay, I see both sides now. This Chris guy really knows his stuff.
He really does. And the great thing about Podtastic Audio is that Chris always offers practical solutions, even when dealing with tricky topics like this.
So does he offer any advice for creators who are on the fence about timestamps?
Absolutely. He suggests starting small, maybe only timestamp the most important segments or guest interviews. That way you're giving listeners a little bit of guidance without completely dismantling the flow of your episode.
Okay, I'm liking that approach. It's a compromise. But what about those of us who are all in on timestamps? What tips does he have for us timestamp enthusiasts?
Well, buckle up because Chris has a whole treasure trove of tips for making your timestamps truly shine.
Ooh, can't wait to hear those.
Yeah.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground for one segment.
You're telling me? It feels like we just scratched the surface of Chris's wisdom.
We'll have to dive even deeper into the practical stuff in the next part of our deep dive.
For sure. We'll cover everything from writing killer timestamp descriptions to making sure your timestamps work across different podcasting apps. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're still hanging out in the world of podcast timestamps.
Okay, maybe not the most glamorous topic, but I'm definitely learning a lot.
And there's still so much to learn.
So last time we covered like the big picture why timestamps are so helpful for listeners and creators.
Right, about how they can boost engagement and reach and all that.
Exactly. But now I want to get into the nitty gritty, like how do we actually use timestamps effectively?
Well, you're in luck because Chris from Podtastic Audio is like the timestamp guru.
He really seems to know his stuff.
He does. And in this episode, he gives us a ton of practical tips for making timestamps work for us, not against us.
Okay, I'm all ears. Hit me with those tips.
All right, so first things first, Chris is a big believer in being selective. Yeah, you don't want to timestamp every other sentence.
Like, that'd be way too much.
Yeah.
Like timestamp 0.02, host takes a sip of water.
Exactly. Nobody needs that level of detail.
So what should we timestamp?
Focus on the key moments that listeners might actually want to revisit or share with a friend.
Okay, so the really juicy stuff.
Exactly. Think big takeaways, surprising insights, or maybe that hilarious story your guest told.
Those moments where you're like, whoa, I got to remember this.
Yep. Those are your timestamp-worthy moments.
Got it. But just having a time code isn't very helpful.
True. You need a good description, too.
So what makes a good timestamp description?
Chris says they should be like mini headlines.
Mini headlines.
Yeah, they should tell listeners exactly what they're going to get if they click on that timestamp.
So instead of just timestamp 32.45, it should be something like 32.45, the one productivity hack that changed my life.
Now you're getting it. You want to pique their curiosity and make them eager to jump to that section?
Okay, clear descriptions, check. What else?
Consistency. Chris says it's super important to be consistent with your timestamping.
So if you timestamp major segments in one episode, stick with that format for other episodes.
Exactly. Don't go from timestamping every 10 minutes to suddenly timestamping every little topic change.
Right, that'd be confusing. It's like changing the rules of a game halfway through.
Exactly. Consistency helps build trust with your audience. They know what to expect.
Okay, so clear descriptions, consistency, got it. But what about the actual creation of timestamps? Is it super complicated?
Not at all. Most podcasting platforms have built-in tools for adding chapters.
Chapter?
Yeah, it's basically just another word for timestamps.
Oh, okay, so I just add these chapters and boom, timestamps magically appear.
Pretty much. But the way those timestamps or chapters show up can vary depending on the app the listener is using.
So I should probably test it out in a few different apps.
Definitely want to make sure your listeners have a good experience no matter what app they're using.
Makes sense. Now, you seem pretty pro timestamp. Do you think every podcaster should use them?
That's a tough one. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer.
So it depends. What are some things to consider?
Well, think about your audience. Are they busy professionals who might appreciate being able to jump to specific segments?
Or maybe there's students using podcasts to learn about a particular topic.
Exactly. Timestamps can be super helpful in those cases.
But what about the creators who are worried about timestamps ruining their artistic vision?
I totally get that concern. For some types of podcasts, timestamps might not be the best fit.
Like if you're telling a really personal story or creating a highly produced audio drama.
Exactly. In those cases, the flow and structure are so important that timestamps might actually take away from the experience.
So it's about being intentional and choosing the right tools for the job.
Absolutely. And ultimately, the decision of whether or not to use timestamps is up to the individual creator.
Well said. And hey, even if someone decides timestamps aren't right for them, they can still learn a ton from Chris and Podtastic Audio.
Oh, for sure. He's got amazing advice on all sorts of podcasting topics.
All right. I'm convinced I'm adding Podtastic Audio to my must-listen list.
Awesome. You won't regret it.
So we've covered the why, the how, and now I'm wondering, is there even more to this whole timestamp thing?
You bet. We've only scratched the surface.
Ooh, getting deep.
I like it. In the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some even bigger questions about timestamps and their impact on the world of podcasting.
Sounds intriguing. Can't wait.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of podcast timestamps.
I gotta say, after all this talk about timestamps, I'm starting to see them in a whole new light.
Yeah, me too. It's definitely more nuanced than I initially thought.
Right. Like at first I was all about the listener's right to skip around.
Convenience over everything.
Totally. But then we heard from Chris at Podtastic Audio.
And he really opened our eyes to the creator's perspective.
Yeah, he made some valid points about artistic integrity and crafting a cohesive listening experience.
But even after considering all that, I still think timestamps can be a really valuable tool.
Yeah. Tell me more.
Well, think about it. Let's say you're listening to a podcast episode that's just jam-packed with information, like an interview with an expert in their field.
Ooh, yeah. Those can be gold mines.
Right. But sometimes life gets in the way and you have to pause the episode.
The worst.
Right. And then when you come back to it later, you're like, wait, where was I?
And then you spend like 10 minutes trying to find your spot.
Exactly. But with timestamps, you can just jump right back to where you left off.
Okay. Yeah, that's super helpful.
It's all about making the content more accessible.
And timestamps can also make it easier to share specific parts of an episode.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. Like if you hear a piece of advice that really resonates with you.
Instead of telling your friend to listen to the whole hour-long episode, you can just send them the timestamp for that specific segment.
Exactly.
It's like creating a curated playlist of your favorite podcast moments.
Love that analogy. And it goes back to what Chris said about catering to different types of listeners.
Right. Some people want the full experience while others just want the highlights.
Yeah. And timestamps let you do both.
So it's all about options.
Exactly.
But I think the key takeaway here is that timestamps are only effective if they're done well.
Couldn't agree more.
Like those descriptions have got to be clear and enticing.
Totally. You got to tell me what I'm going to get. Don't just give me a time code.
Right. It's got to be more than just an index. It's got to be like a preview that makes me want to click.
So where do we land on this whole timestamp debate?
Well, I think it comes down to intentionality. As creators, we need to consider our audience, our content, and our goals for each episode.
Ask yourself, are there natural segments that would benefit from timestamps?
Would they enhance the listening experience or just create unnecessary fragmentation?
Exactly. It's all about making thoughtful choices.
And at the end of the day, timestamps are a tool.
They're not a requirement.
It's up to each creator to decide what works best for their show and their audience.
And hey, even if you decide timestamps aren't for you,
you can still learn a ton from Chris at Podtastic Audio.
Absolutely. He's got amazing advice on all aspects of podcasting.
From storytelling to audio quality to building a loyal audience.
He's a wealth of knowledge, and he always delivers it with a sense of humor.
So whether you're a seasoned podcaster or just starting out,
definitely check out Podtastic Audio.
You won't regret it.
All right, so after all this discussion, what's the verdict? Timestamps, yay or nay?
For me, it's a thoughtful yay.
I'm with you on that.
But ultimately, the choice is yours.
What matters most is creating shows that people love to listen to.
Well said. Keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep those mics hot.